Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish, and on today's episode, I'm going to do a bit of a season in review by looking at the individual players for the Grizzlies last year. My plan is to review the players and also Taylor Jenkins and try and assess whether or not, in my opinion, that player had a good individual season or a bad individual season. Basically, I'm going to do a pass-fail for every Grizzlies player. Okay, not every Grizzlies player. Actually, I don't even know how many players I'm going to get to on today's episode. My plan is to review every player who played for the Grizzlies last year that was on a guaranteed contract. So I'm not going to do any 10-day guys. But the conceit of what I'm doing is I'm going to say, did that player either get better or do we feel more highly of that player after this season or not? And of course, the team won 27 games last year. So essentially, overall, it was a bad year. But what I'm going to try to do again, go individual by individual and say good year or bad year, pass or fail for their season. And of course, with the terrible overall team record and the story of the season being injuries and also a suspension, it's not, of course, fair to reduce it all to like a yes-no pass-fail grade. But hey, that's what I'm going to do. And I think it's going to be pretty fun. Before I start, just a word, if you want to support this program, do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. You can join the listener Slack. You can join the Grits and Grinds Memphis Grizzlies Slack channel. You also get exclusive bonus content. So if you want to do that, come over to patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. All right. To further spell out kind of how I'm judging or how I plan to judge each player, I'm going to ask things like, did this player get better? Did this player become more valuable to the team as far as long-term roster building? Did this player's trade value increase or decrease? Did this player possibly increase the amount of money or decrease the amount of money that you'd expect them to get on their next contract? If you want to think about it like video games in 2K, did this player's 2K rating go up, or should it have gone up, or should it have gone down? So using all of those kind of parameters, I'm just going to say whether it was a good season or a bad season. And I'm going to try not to cheat much with like chickening out with giving it incomplete. But I might. We'll see. But let's start, actually, before we get to the players, let's start with Taylor Jenkins. Did Taylor Jenkins have a good year last year individually? Did he do the most with the situation that was presented to him? I think assessing Taylor Jenkins is much harder than assessing any of the players. Part of the reason is it's just hard to assess NBA coaches. So much of their job is just managing personalities and things. But when we look at Taylor Jenkins, the good, if you want to argue he had a good season, I think a lot of people felt like he kept the season from going totally off the tracks. I don't know if I prescribe to that theory. The season basically went totally off the tracks. What more could he have done with all the injuries? Maybe nothing. Maybe 27 wins was the absolute ceiling. I think if you want to write something down good that he did, this team competed all year, sort of, but they did defend all year, finishing with the 12th best defense. That's pretty good based on the players that were available. Personally, for Taylor Jenkins, one big area of growth was challenging calls. Taylor Jenkins and the coaching staff, they were very good at challenging calls this year. They had one of the best call overturned percentages in the NBA this season. So that was a big area of improvement. Also, the team learned to take charges this year, although maybe that's going to go under Marcus Smart's category coming up a little bit later. And the Grizzlies, of course, pulled off a few wild upsets late in the season when they were basically reduced to essentially all 10-day and two-way guys. Now, those are the positive things for Taylor Jenkins. Now, the negative things, there are a lot, in my opinion. I think beyond the team being bad all year, where you can maybe excuse that to injuries, when the season was still competitive and we still had dreams of being good, the team was not good. The team stunk from the start of the year. And I feel like we can't ignore that just based on the injuries that followed. The offense this year, of course, they finished last in the NBA in offensive rating in a handful of other offensive categories. But like the offense started off horrible. The offense was a nightmare starting on opening night. Also, this team had the worst home record since the Vancouver expansion season. Also, he's still kind of weird dealing with foul trouble, in my personal opinion. Pulling guys out, important guys out with 3 fouls or 4 fouls and not letting his guys ever play through it. Also pulling out backups who pick up a 3rd foul in the second quarter. Like they would go out of the game, and I don't understand that whatsoever. So it is certainly hard to assess if Taylor Jenkins did a good job. Also, like the questions we have about Taylor Jenkins as a head coach, we didn't get any of those answered this year. Because I feel like the big question with Taylor Jenkins coming into the year was the team's playoff performance and the team's offensive performance and the team's half-court performance. Well, we know the half-court performance was still terrible. The playoff performance, we didn't find out anything. Like coming into this year, I felt like the biggest issue with Taylor Jenkins as a head coach was the fact that the Grizzlies had lost all 3 game ones they had at home when they were the higher seed in the playoffs. And then in all of those series where they were the higher seed, the first road game, game 3, they fell down by at least 26 points in all 3 of them. They came back and won one of those games. Now, these are all specific instances. There's the series against the Timberwolves. You fell down by 26 or more. I can't remember, actually. But you came back and won that one. But then the Warriors, game 3, that same year, you got destroyed. The Lakers, game 3, last year, you got destroyed. So I had big questions about his playoff performance, and I didn't know how much to assign the blame to the players or the coach. Also, I felt like he made mistakes as a coach not shortening his rotation in the playoffs the previous 2 seasons. Of course, we never got to see any of that this year. So those are still, in my mind, unanswerable questions. But when I look at this year, and before the rash of injuries totally took over, and if I just look at the first 25 games, those games without Ja Morant, when we had expectations of doing well, in those first 25 games, the Grizzlies were last in offensive rating. They were 6-19, of course, in the first 25 games without Ja Morant. Then when Ja Morant returned, all right, Ja Morant played 9 games. They went 6-3 in those games. That's good. Great winning percentage. However, in those 9 games, the offense was still bad. It was well below average. It was bottom 3rd offensive rating, even though they went 6-3. So I don't know. I don't know how to assess Taylor Jenkins. And to start off this entire pass-fail thing, I'm going to give my only incomplete right here. I don't know what to make of Taylor Jenkins this year. I am extremely concerned that the offense was horrible in the first 25 games when you had Marcus Smart and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane. Maybe that's just growing pains of adding a new player like Marcus Smart to become part of your big 3. I also sort of hold it against Taylor Jenkins that he was prioritizing David Roddy and Ziaire Williams in the rotation early in the year before we got to Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson. Now, a lot of people say, look at the development of Vince Williams Jr. That's a credit to the coaching staff. Maybe it is. I don't know how to assign credit or blame, but I do have somewhat concerning thoughts that, well, Vince and Gigi didn't get into the rotation without all the injuries in front of them. So I don't know. So for Taylor Jenkins, there's good that the team defended. He's very good at out-of-timeout plays. He was very good at challenging calls. Seemed like he managed the roster as good as he could this year. But then there's the problems with this team was supposed to be competitive in the first 25 games. They were not. They were horrible at home. And I just don't know what to make of it. So For Taylor Jenkins, I am not going to assign a pass-fail. I'm going to give him an incomplete, but I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to take this road for anybody else. Everybody else gets either, yes, good year or bad year. And let's go to Ja Morant. The good for Ja Morant. Of course, they were 6-3 when he played. In the 9 games he played, he continued to perform at an undisputed all-star level. That is the end of the good section. I mean, maybe you want to say he stayed out of trouble, but like that's the bar is the floor scenario. You don't get credit for staying out of trouble. So the bad, well, the season got ruined because he missed the first 25 games. We thought the Grizzlies could keep their head above water until he came back. They did not. So the bad is he missed the first 25 games that killed the season. Then he got hurt, only played 9 games. So for me, that's a bad season. Straight up bad season. It's an unlucky season. You could say it's not his fault he got hurt. But I think when you look at Ja Morant, the excitement you might have had 2 seasons ago, that is certainly diminished. That's gone down. So for me, his value going forward, it has diminished. Now, not to say it's going to be bad, of course. He still is an all-NBA level guy. He's the biggest star in franchise history. Easily, 2-time All-Star. Of course, 1 Rookie of the Year, 1 Most Improved Player. The team's best player going forward. He can be great, but he has to now basically bounce back from a lost season. And so, yeah, Ja Morant, you played 9 games. I'm going to give that a bad year, unfortunately. And it was bad for the Grizzlies. Now, Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren was the guy who was most available for the Grizzlies all year. He played 66 games before getting shut down. He was the constant for the Grizzlies. He had career highs in points per game, career highs in assists per game, career highs in free throws attempted per game, also steals per game. So Jaren carried this huge burden all year. He scored a lot. He had 12 games where he scored at least 30 points. Coming into this year, he had just 10. Going to the improved passing, had 8 games this year with 5 or more assists. Coming into the season, he only had 2 of those games in his career. In this season, I mean, it was a lost season for the team, but in this season, he set single game career highs in points and assists and rebounds and steals. So like, all that's good. Also, his foul rate was just slightly down. The negatives would be his defensive numbers. Some of them took a dive. Of course, the blocks per game went way down. His rebounding numbers were worse than ever, and he still fouls a whole lot. Also, of course, the team was horrible. But despite that, I think with the way he performed, with his availability, with the number of on-ball reps he got, which should benefit the team down the line, this is a good individual season for Jaren Jackson Jr. Good job, buddy. Thumbs up. I give you a passing grade with flying colors. His running mate, Desmond Bane, I will say when Desmond Bane played, he was scintillating. Scored a career-high 23.7 points per game. His assists took a big jump as he was handed this much bigger role with ball handling. Averaged 5.5 assists per game. He even attempted more threes per possession than last season. The increased shot volume from Desmond Bane, that is a good thing. He scored 49 points against the Rockets. That's a career high. He had career-high rebounding games with 13. He had a career-high 16 assists in a game. He had 11 games scoring 30 or more despite only playing 42 games on the season. Also, despite carrying this much larger offensive burden, he handled that very well, and his 2-point percentage actually slightly increased this year. His finishing at the rim was awesome. He shot a career-high 72% at the basket. That's a higher percentage than Ja Morant has done in any season. I mean, just barely, but still. All of that is great. Also, Desmond Bane's handle, I think, improved a lot. He showed he can play point guard in a pinch. He played point guard much better than Marcus Smart did this year. So all that, I think, is great from Desmond Bane this season. The bad is just the injuries. And maybe he could have come back. Maybe he could have played through some of these things if the season had been competitive. So the bad, basically, it's only the lack of availability. But I think because of how well he played when he was available and because he still got better, he improved once again. So again, I think this is an easy one. A good season for Desmond Bane. He is still on that path, I feel like, to mirror the careers of some like Hall of Fame guys. I mean, yes, of course, he hasn't made an all-star game yet, but like he seems like a Joe Dumars or a Ray Allen or maybe a Klay Thompson or Reggie Miller. All of his offensive statistics, of course, still compare favorably to those guys. I mean, it's a different era, a little easier on the offense. Maybe you can be concerned, and I am a little bit concerned that, again, the team wasn't good enough when he played, and this might be a broken record. I'm tapping the sign. When Marcus and Desmond and Jaren were available, I thought this team was going to be much better than they actually were. So maybe that's a little bit concerning, but still, this is an easy one for me. A good season for Desmond Bane. Now, what about Marcus Smart? The big acquisition last offseason. This one's kind of tough. The good for Marcus Smart, it's pretty short, not to show my hand. The good is he made an awesome diving hustle play against the Clippers that helped them win that game. He was great in the Pelicans game where Ja Morant got the buzzer beater. He made 8 threes against the Lakers in what ended up being Ja Morant's final game of the year. He did. All right, this is the good. He taught the Grizzlies to take charges. That's why he was brought in. And this year, the Grizzlies were tied for 9th in the NBA with 39 charges taken. Maybe we classify that under Taylor Jenkins, but this team had been awful at drawing charges. Now they were in the top 10 in the NBA, so good job for Marcus. Now the bad for Marcus. I mean, the huge, obvious one is he played 20 games. He's a guy with injury concerns, and those injury concerns were realized. And of course, I think, again, if they were competitive near the end of the year, he would have returned. But he only played 20 games. The Grizzlies only won 7 times when he played. Also, he shot 31% from 3. But you can't, I guess, really be mad at that because that's basically his career average. He was extremely turnover prone. An outrageous number of turnovers, frankly. He averaged 3.1 turnovers per game and only 4.3 assists per game. He didn't, to my eye, seem to mesh that well with the main guys. Maybe that's just the learning curve. Maybe they'll get much better going into another year with another, playing together and practicing together. Also, I feel like I expected, and I feel like most of you guys expected, him to serve as a replacement point guard. When Ja Morant was not available, I thought that was a significant part of his value, would be the ability to sort of replace Tyus Jones and sort of replace Dillon Brooks. And he did not. He did not seem to work that well as a point guard. So all of that, I think, makes this a bad season for Marcus Smart. And all of those issues, I mean, the bad shooting numbers, the bad turnover numbers, hopefully you could say that's just a small sample size, but then that goes back to it's a small sample size because he only played 20 games. So, yeah, sorry, it's a bad season from Marcus Smart. And making it a little bit worse, this is not Marcus Smart's fault, but like the pick you traded for him, that Warriors pick ended up higher than maybe you thought it was. And also, if you look at like just his age, he's a year older. His trade value absolutely diminished this entire season. You could not trade him for what you paid for him the previous year. So that makes it an easy grade of a bad year for Marcus Smart. Now let's hit some guys who didn't finish the year on the team. Let's blow through these guys. That's right. I'm including former Grizzlies players. Let's start with Steven Adams. The good for Steven Adams? He played in 2 preseason games. And then he got traded for second-round picks. That's the other good. The bad? Well, he didn't play for the Grizzlies. I feel like basically every Grizzlies fan had pinned their hopes of a great season on his return. And Steven's absence, his knee injury, combined with Brandon Clark's absence, I think those were the main excuses we had for why the series against the Lakers last year went negatively. So his return was supposed to alleviate all those problems, and then he never returned. So he could not play basketball when he was desperately needed. Sorry, Steven. Love you. Wish you have nothing but a great career on the Rockets next season. But for the sake of this exercise, that's a bad season. Ziaire Tillman. The good for Ziaire Tillman. He had career best block and steal numbers. That's the end of the list. Oh, also, again, he got traded for second-round picks, just like Steven Adams. Ziaire Tillman had a huge opportunity coming into this year when we found out there was no Steven Adams and, of course, no Brandon Clark for most of the year, this was Xavier Tillman's time to shine. He did not shine. And weirdly, his offense got way worse. Maybe it's not that weird. He, like many other players, was seriously, I think, harmed by no Ja Morant. His shooting numbers, massive dip. And maybe you could say the massive dip in 2-point field goal percentage was due to Ja Morant. Like other guys are going to have this problem. Santi Aldama, Ziaire Williams. But still, his 2-point field goal percentage was around 40%, and that's just not workable for an NBA big. He also did not make three-pointers. He knew that was an area of growth that was needed for him to solidify his place in the pecking order, to guarantee himself playing time in a rotation, and he did not do it. So he didn't make threes. He stopped making 2-pointers, and also somehow he shot 41% from the foul line. So this is not a hard decision. It was a bad year for Xavier Tillman while he was on the Grizzlies. Maybe he'll win a title on the Celtics. I'll be happy for him. I like Xavier Tillman as a person, but it was a terrible year for him on the Grizzlies. Maybe he'll come back next year on a minimum deal. David Roddy. David Roddy traded at the trade deadline as well. The good for David Roddy, he beat out the other wings that he was competing with for playing time. He was the preferred option for Taylor Jenkins and the coaching staff among the other similar options. He averaged 23 minutes per game. He started 13 games for the Grizzlies. He finished the season 7th on the Grizzlies in total minutes. The bad, of course, he never developed past being a 30% three-point shooter. And basically, he's a subpar scorer from every area on the court. So, while on the one hand, his objective of beat out the other wings for playing time, he did that, but ultimately he wasn't good enough to be on the team. I commend the front office for moving him, getting something back for him, and clearing up that logjam of, I'm going to say, subpar players on the wing. So, sorry, David, I'm giving you a bad season. You get a failing grade. All right, we've done like 6 people. We have a ton to go. Let's take a quick break, and then I'll be back with some of your other favorites like Gigi Jackson, Santi Aldama, Luke Kennard, and more. Hey guys, I've been using Underdog Fantasy for a while. Maybe it makes those 30-point NBA playoff games a little bit more exciting. But if you want to play fantasy sports for cash, if you want to pick highers or lowers to win big bucks, you can do it at Underdog. I find it a lot of fun. If you want to try it out, use the promo code FBBF, and Underdog will match your opening deposit up to $100. So if you want to try out Underdog, use that promo code FBBF, or you can just click the link in this episode's description. All right, let's keep going, reviewing these individual Grizzlies players' seasons. So far, I've said Ja Morant, bad season. Jaren Jackson Jr., good season. Desmond Bane, good season. Marcus Smart, bad season. Steven Adams, bad season. Xavier Tillman, bad season. David Roddy, bad season. Let's talk about our guy, Santi Aldama. Santi Aldama. He had individual career-high games this year for points and rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. Had a career-high 28 points back in November. However, I feel like for Santi's grade, we have to weigh in a lot the expectations for the year. The expectations for Santi coming into this season, the hope was he would make yet another leap. He would become a huge, essential part to the front court. He paired so nicely with Jaren Jackson Jr. last season. That was a particular front court combination I was excited to see this year. I thought it would become a crucial part of the Grizzlies' identity. Of course, the opportunity for Santi with no Steven Adams and no Brandon Clark was immense. He could have basically seized all the playing time he could handle. But much like Xavier Tillman, he did not. His playing time was erratic. His actual play was erratic. His scoring, it came and went. He had several big games in November, but then he had like a 40-game stretch where he averaged 9 points per game while playing 25 minutes per game. He was extremely inconsistent all year. He could not nail down the role. He could not basically force Taylor Jenkins' hand to be like, listen, we're always closing with Santi, or Santi gets 30 minutes every night. He's delivering. No, he did not deliver. His shooting did not come around. His 2-point field goal percentage was terrible. His 3-point field goal percentage was not what you had hoped. A lot of the 2-point percentage, it took a massive dive. We directly attribute that, I do, to not having Ja Morant. Last year, he at least got lobs, and he could finish and dunk a lot more. Well, I know he would be better with Ja Morant, but you could say that for basically anybody. I felt like this year showed that maybe Santi Aldama was not ready for a bigger role on a playoff team. I came into the year thinking, all right, this guy could nail down like being a contributor on a team that, competes for home court advantage. I no longer feel that way. It's now a question mark. Can this guy be in the top 8 or 9 of a really, really good team? I lean no. And based on his second year, how promising it was, I think if you think about like contract value, so he's going into the final year of his rookie deal, it's no longer assured that he's going to be on the team. So the odds of him being on the team, that went down. Whatever you think an extension for him might be, I'm pretty sure the value of that went down based on what it would have been coming into this year. So for that, I think it's pretty easy. You have to say Santi Aldama had a bad season. If we're just doing the yes or no, pass, fail, it's a fail. He was disappointing. Kind of the bloom has come off the rose a little bit with Santi Aldama. So hopefully he can bounce back next year. But I no longer feel super confident he's going to be on this team, a year from now or 2 years from now. And so because of that, I think the trend for him, it went down based on this season. So that is a negative grade. Now, Luke Kennard. All right. Much like Santi Aldama, I was very excited for what this season would bring for Luke Kennard. When he was acquired by the Grizzlies, if you go back and listen to my episode then, frankly, I was indifferent. Was not that excited about getting Luke Kennard. But then last year, after the trade deadline, after he got acquired by the Grizzlies, he was an absolute flamethrower. You remember, he made 54% of his threes on the team after the trade. He made a franchise record 10 3-pointers in a game against the Rockets last year. And then, of course, we cherry-picked all those stats. Everyone did. Looking at the lineup data of hey, when Ja, Desmond, and Luke play together, we're outscoring everybody by 40 points per 100 possessions. We did it in the playoffs. We did it in the regular season. He's going to have a huge role on this team when, this year, and it never came to fruition. And now, of course, the story of that is injuries and suspension. The team, Ja Morant, Desmond, and Luke never really got a chance to get off the ground. Also, the team acquired Marcus Smart, who was a player ahead of Luke in the depth chart. So none of that necessarily Luke Kennard's fault. But the problem I have with Luke Kennard, and that I think a lot of people have, is that he did not, in my mind, take advantage of his opportunities this season. And also, he was not available this season. And so many of these Grizzlies players, the season's all about were they hurt or were they not hurt? But the problem with Luke, and also the problem with Marcus Smart, and also the problem with maybe Ja Morant, and also the problem with Derrick Rose, these guys, whether it's fair or not, could justly be called injury prone. Luke Kennard is injury prone. And Luke Kennard not being available to play through the first 25 games very much, that hurt the Grizzlies. Now, the good for Luke, of course, I should maybe start with the good. He finished second in the NBA in 3-point percentage. We know Luke Kennard, one of the most accurate 3-point shooters in the NBA. Luke also great foul shooter, made 89% of his free throws. Of course, he didn't play enough or get to the line enough to qualify for leaderboards there. But for me, it's the lack of availability for Luke one more time. And it's also, he was needed to step up this year. And he's unable to step up. They needed him to score. This team was last in the NBA in offense all year. They were last at 3-point percentage basically all year. Now, Luke made his threes, but he should have shot the ball more. There were way too many times when Luke Kennard was playing in lineups where he was the highest paid player out there, where he was the only guy on a guaranteed deal, and he still wouldn't shoot the ball. He only had one 20-point game all year, despite this team desperately needing his offense. So for that, and for his lack of availability, I got to say, no, it's a bad season for Luke Kennard. Also, he got passed in the depth chart by Vince Williams Jr. When everyone's healthy next year, Vince is going to play over Luke Kennard. Gigi Jackson's going to play over Luke Kennard. They're not exactly the same position, but like there's never going to be a lineup where Gigi couldn't take the minutes of Luke Kennard next season. Also, I am much less certain of him being on the team next year than I was like the previous year. I thought the odds of him sticking around for a few years, pretty good. Now I'm like, nope, I think it's very likely he's not actually on the team next year. So let's give Luke a bad season grade. Sorry about that, everyone. Now, Gigi Jackson, on the other hand, this one's easy. Gigi exploded onto the scene when he finally got playing time with some huge games against the Knicks and the Warriors, and he went on to have many, many massive games. He was the International Paper Player of the Game 7 times last year. Not that really means anything. But Gigi, of course, was a big bright spot for this lost season. He set all kinds of marks for the youngest player in franchise history to do this and that. Also, in some cases, he was the youngest player in NBA history to do a lot of things. So he had a ton of massive scoring games. He contributed in a lot of different ways. If you want to say the bad, I mean, what's the bad? He had some stinkers sprinkled in. Who cares? The future is extremely bright for Gigi. Also, if you look at this upcoming draft, if Gigi, who had reclassified to be in last year's draft, if he hadn't reclassified, Gigi would be in consideration for the #1 overall pick. So this is an easy grade for Gigi. He passes. He had a great season exploding onto the scene. Let's do another easy one. Vince Williams Jr., a.k.a. The Machine, a.k.a. Bug, a.k.a. V Nasty, a.k.a. V Willie, a.k.a. The Reaper. Vince Williams Jr. was great this year. And if you tuned into this episode just to hear Vince Williams Jr. talk, I'm sorry, because this section is going to be extremely short. Vince Williams Jr. was awesome. I'm giving him a great season. What more is there to say? He was really, really good. Let's move on to Ziaire Williams. All right. I don't know whose expectations were higher coming into the year. Like, I think we expected a lot from Santi Aldama. We also expected a lot from Ziaire Williams. This was a mammoth season for Ziaire as far as him establishing a role on the team. He needed to bounce back from a totally lost second year. He needed to win a consistent role on the team. He had a promising preseason, and then when the regular season started, it was back to the normal Ziaire struggles. He was ineffective, and also, like a lot of other players, he was frequently unavailable. I mean, the good things were that he got a little better at rebounding. He had his first career double-double this year. I mean, he maybe played the best game of his career in the game against the Bucks right before the All-Star break. But the rest of it, it's just basically all bad. I mean, I don't feel like you can understate the importance of just being available. I think that's a huge strike against Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard and also Ziaire Williams. At least Luke and Marcus Smart have proven they are, decent to good NBA players. Ziaire has not proven he's a good NBA player. And also, he keeps getting hurt. And also, he's a bad shooter. He has not improved on his three-point shooting. He shot 30% on threes once again. He was sub 40% overall on his field goal percentage. A lot of that, no Ja Morant to spoon feed him easy dunks. He also, much like Luke, got passed to the depth chart. Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson are so far ahead of Ziaire in the depth chart, it's not funny. Ziaire got every opportunity too. He got to start 15 games. The Grizzlies were 3-12 when he was the starter. The odds of Ziaire being a part of this team going forward diminished greatly this year. So for that, this is an easy bad season for Ziaire Williams. All right, next let's do Jake LaRavia. An interesting year for Jake in the sense that he only emerged basically once the season was effectively over. Like figuring out how much of his strong play was legitimate, it's a huge question. Also, a lot of his shooting numbers, they come from just a few massive games. But with that being said, this was easy. Like coming into the year, we had no evidence that Jake LaRavia was a NBA player. Regardless of the circumstances, Jake showed a lot of positives down the stretch, put a lot on film that says like, hey, I can belong in this league. Like he had some strong defensive moments. He scored the basketball. He had some extremely streaky shooting, but he proved he could get to the line. He looked more poised on the court to my eye than most of the other players down the stretch. He scored in double figures in 16 of his final 19 games. He scored 25 or more 4 different times. I mean, of course, again, these games were just glorified garbage time, but still, he made 8 threes in a game once. He had another game with 7. For the season, he shot 34% from 3. Of course, if you take away those 2 games where he made 8 and 7 threes, his 3-point percentage goes down to 28%. But still, even while we have questions about whether or not he's actually any good, this is an easy, good individual season for Jake LaRavia. He showed he belonged, and for that, yeah, you pass him easily. Good season for Jake LaRavia. Let's do Brandon Clark next. Brandon Clark played in 6 games. This was a great season for Brandon Clark. Brandon Clark returned from injury and looked like his old self, was active and athletic. Seemed like the Brandon Clark we'd been missing. He didn't suffer a setback of any sort, so he got to play 6 games. He looked like himself, and now he can get ready for next year. So that's an easy, great season. The only bad thing I'll allow you to say about Brandon Clark's season is he was 1 out of 6 at the foul line. What's that about? But no, nothing but good vibes and good memories for me for seeing Brandon Clark back out on a basketball court and playing well. And now we only have a few players left, so let's push through. We'll do the entire roster of guaranteed contract guys. Let's go to Lamar Stevens next. All right, Lamar Stevens is not under contract for next season. I know a lot of you guys want him back. But the good for Lamar, he played with an immediate spark. When he showed up, you saw that guy had fight. He played hard. He consistently brought good effort, good energy, played with force. He could score the basketball. He was not shy. He was not Luke Kennard shy. He would attack and try to score, and he played hard. And all of that, it was a breath of fresh air in a bad season. The bad for Lamar, he's just not a three-point shooter. He can't shoot the ball really that well. He maybe shoots the ball too much. He's a very inefficient shooter. He's not good at passing the basketball. He had really bad assist numbers. So I'll say overall, it's a good season for Lamar. I think he proved that he deserves a roster spot somewhere in the NBA next year. I do think it's unlikely to be on the Grizzlies, just because when you look at the players they have right now, they don't need a non-shooting 3/ very, very undersized 4 who can't shoot. Like they don't need that position at all. I mean, maybe if there's a big roster shakeup with a trade that moves out a lot of guys, there becomes a spot for Lamar Stevens. But I find it unlikely he comes back to the Grizzlies. However, I do think it was a good year for Lamar for what he did on the Grizzlies for his career going forward. Next we have John Konchar. All right, John Konchar. This was tricky. The good for Konchar, you're usually never mad if he's out there on the court. He's a good connective piece, great hustle player, strong rebounder. Overall this season for Konchar, he had a career best season at blocking shots. The bad, though, is he shot 31% from 3. The 3-point shooting has never come around. The very low usage, high percentage stuff he did his first few seasons, it just hasn't come back. And you know, when the season mattered this year, like before the All-Star break, Konchar shot 29% from 3. So because of that low 3-point percentage, it made him have a career low effective field goal percentage. And so like if Konchar can't make 3-pointers, he has extremely limited value. So despite the fact I like when Konchar plays, despite the fact that he proved to be clearly better than a lot of the other players or most of the other players on the wing, I think because he's peaked 2 years ago and he shot a career low from 3 and had a career low in points per 100 possessions. I got to say that's a bad season for John Konchar. Konchar fails for me. Like, he's got to make the three-pointers. I don't want him to be in the top 12 of the rotation next year. If he's still around, that's fine. He's like a nice Swiss Army knife that can plug a hole in a pinch, but like, I don't think you can depend on him to be a part of a good playoff rotation. And it's been disappointing the last couple of years for Konchar. So that comes out to a bad season. And we got two more players that I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and tell you the players I'm not going to do. I'm not doing guys who actually didn't play for us. So I'm not going to do Josh Christopher or Victor Oladipo. I'm also not doing Chimezie Metu or Kenneth Lofton Jr., even though they did play. I'm not doing Isaiah Todd. Also, not doing Bismack Biyombo. Who wants to review a Bismack Biyombo season? Final verdict, he was Bismack Biyombo. What do you want from him? But the final two players will do Derrick Rose and Yuta Watanabe. Derrick Rose, the good. There was some good from Derrick Rose. He still had some burst. He could still get by some guys. He made 37% of his threes, was actually not a terrible number. His assist to turnover ratio this year was better than his career average. All that stuff was good. For Derrick Rose, also, I feel like we're contractually obligated to say his off-the-court presence was good. I don't know what that means. I mean, he was supposed to be a locker room leader, and apparently he was. Everyone loved him. Derrick Rose's son's playing on Ja Morant's AAU team. It's a feel-good story, but also I kind of wish he could have helped on the court. The bad for Derrick Rose, he played in 24 games. The Grizzlies were 6-18 when Derrick Rose played. This team needed a point guard for a lot of the season, and Derrick Rose was unavailable. And it's not necessarily Derrick Rose's fault that he's injury prone. The man is very, very old and also injury prone. And I don't know. He's not getting any younger. I feel like the arrow's pointed down on his on-court contributions. So for me, that's a bad season. I'm not mad about it. I blame the front office for the decision to bring him in. Maybe he helped off the court. But I mean, maybe somebody else could have helped off the court who also could have helped on the court. So for that, I will say, sorry, Derrick. You got a bad season in my book for playing in 24 games. And then finally, Yuta Watanabe. Yuta barely played on the Grizzlies. He only made 1 out of 10 three-pointers when he was on the Grizzlies. And he's since announced he's leaving the NBA. So I guess no verdict needed there. Bon voyage, Utah. Best of luck with your career overseas going forward. And with that, I think I've reviewed everyone. There's a great chance I left somebody out. And apologies to the two-way players. Maybe I'll go over them in a future episode. But I did that for fun. I'm not going to be super worked up if you disagree with one of the grades. Honestly, I worked really hard on this. I thought long and hard about it. I think most of them were pretty easy. As far as if you want to say the guy had a good or bad individual season, maybe there's pushback on like a Santi or a Luke or like Marcus Smart or even Taylor Jenkins, who I, wimped out and didn't give an actual grade. But I feel pretty good about my work here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support my work, do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. If you want to try out Underdog Fantasy, use that promo code FBBF. All right. Hope you guys have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.